Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Hello, everybody. I want to welcome everyone participating in today's webinar, Secure Act 2.0, How the Act Will Impact Your Retirement Plan. My name is Andrew Dial, and I'm an audit manager here at GRF. I will be today's session moderator. I'd like to start off today with some quick housekeeping items and explain what you will need to do to earn CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically following the webinar. You will be asked to recall 3 words in order to receive credit. Please write down the CPE words when they are given and hold on to them until you receive your certificate. They will not be provided again. The slide deck and recording from today's discussion will be available on the event page on our website. We are joined by Jennifer McCahill and Andrew Remo. Jennifer is an audit partner here at GRF, and Andrew is the Director of Legislative Affairs at the American Retirement Association. Together, they specialize in retirement plan logistics and new legislation.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Jen McCahill. I'm one of the partners here at GRF. So please, you could join us today to talk about some of the changes we'll be seeing to everyone's retirement plan as a result of Secure 2.0. And a big thank you to my co-presenter, Andy Remo from ARA, who graciously accepted. And just so happens that doing a webinar with his auditor was on his bucket list. So I'm glad this is mutually beneficial for us. So thank you to Andy for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Yes, thanks. Welcome. Our agenda is relatively concise. You know, we're going to start off with just some background on the Secure Act, what it means, take a dive into some of the more prevalent changes, those immediately taking effect as in now. Then we'll kind of go through the timeline of key future changes that you would need to be aware of. And throughout the presentation, you know, we'll consider highlighting what is a must, things that you all really need to focus on ensuring your plan is putting in place versus those that are mays and options for you all to consider in the future. And how might this work in actual real life, as we say, real life implementation of some of these changes. So we look forward to chatting through these agenda items. So before we actually get started, we would like to just open it up to the group in a polling question, take a pulse out there of if you're aware of some of these fundamental changes that might impact your plan under Secure 2.0. So while we have this poll up, you know, obviously either, hey, yes, you're aware, or no, you're not sure. We also have those 3 CPE words. So let's just go ahead and throw out the first word that you will need if you want CPE as a result of attending today's webinar. So while everyone's answering that poll, the first CPE word is retirement. So if you just drop that down and make sure you have saved that somewhere, and the first word is retirement, we will ask you to generate those words at the end of the survey. So let's see what the results, so pretty evenly split. Some people are aware of some of the changes, but most of you actually are not aware of the changes. So very good that you're attending today. Hopefully we can give you some insight on what you can expect to see in the next couple of years. So let's get started. Go ahead to the next slide. Thanks, Nathan. All right, just some general background of Secure 2.0. So Secure, that's setting every community up for retirement enhancement. This follows the original Secure legislation that actually was passed back in 2019. The second version of the legislation, the updates, was passed late in 2022. Always last minute, December 29, 2022. And it really aims both the entire legislation really aims at addressing the retirement crisis that we have here in America, with so many individuals ultimately being unprepared for retirement. So the three goals kind of that we've highlighted, the most obvious just being able to allow employees to participate in a retirement plan, the ability for them to save for retirement, improve those retirement plan rules, maybe streamline, reduce the complexities, more easy to navigate, and lower the administrative burden, the cost on employers of setting up a retirement plan. So I know these are pretty fundamental, basic. There's a lot of context behind these ultimate goals of the Secure Act. We'll see kind of how this flows through to the actual changes throughout the presentation. The Act has over 90 actual provisions that go into effect starting now through 2025 is a big chunk of the changes. But it also pushes some of the changes or plans for adjustments in later years. So we'll point out a couple of those that, as it stands now, could take effect beyond 2025. Obviously, we can't go over 90 provisions, so we'll just focus on the things that we think are most prevalent, most relevant, the ones that we have the most questions come up about. So we'll focus on some of the more notable changes to you and your participants and employees.
Yeah, just to add a bit there too, is, just to explain a bit of the political process. So in 2006, that was really the last, in this century, the sort of major retirement bill. It was called the Pension Protection Act. And so you had a gap from 2006 until 2019, where there really wasn't a whole lot of major action in Congress on retirement legislation. And then in 2019, 2016 was really the effort to start pulling together, some might describe as a hodgepodge of improvements around the edges of the system, and develop ideas to incent small businesses to offer a retirement plan through work. And that resulted in the the original Secure Act, which was sort of roughly around 45 to 50 provisions. And so it was a 3-year process, but they really, once they put a bill out there that had widespread bipartisan support in like 2016, the pens were down and the bill was sort of walled off. And so you couldn't really add anything to it. So there was this sort of pent up demand, even though Secure 1.0 passed in 19, to add more ideas. So they were already working on the second version of it while trying to get the first one done, which took a bit longer than anticipated. So you ended up with a bill that's twice as large as the first one. And I think at this point, we're pretty much set, at least for the foreseeable future, with respect to new retirement policy.
Great, thanks, Andy. All right, let's kick it off with some of the immediate changes. So we've highlighted the most notable items that are effective immediately. What must you all focus on the now? The first item, while we don't think it's relatively prevalent, we did want to make a note. It relates to those qualified birth or adoption distributions. And so employers have already had the option of allowing their plan to issue distributions, early distributions, non-penalty distributions, I believe up to 5K for the benefit of the birth or adoption of a child. And under the original legislation, there was actually no guidance on whether you could recontribute those funds. You could recontribute those funds, but there was no guidance on a time period on whether you had to recontribute those funds back into the plan at a later date. And so 2.0 actually set a timeline for recontribution of those previously distributed funds, should you have taken an early distribution for the QBOAD. And so now it's a 3-year time period that you have to be able to recontribute those funds back into the plan from the time the distribution was taken. So again, we don't think, a lot of, this might impact a lot of you, but we did want to make note of this since this is one of those changes that, that is immediate. And if this is, specific to your plan, you would just want to work with your plan administrator and your TPA to make sure that anyone who has one of these outstanding, they're aware of their options under the recontribution under the new legislation.
Yeah, I mean, as Jen mentioned here, this is without a time limit to repay the funds. It would be the reason why many plan sponsors wouldn't adopt this is it was uncertainty. I mean, you didn't want to have to put this in your plan and then 30 years down the line, somebody tries to say, hey, I took this distribution, I want to recontribute this back to the plan. That would be an administrative nightmare for employers. So this is, this was designed to be a plan sponsor friendly measure to put clear rules on recontributions in order to spur more adoption of this distribution.
Thanks. So the next item we have here is related to the required minimum distributions. And you'll probably recall that the age actually increased under the original secure legislation from 70.5 to 72. So I feel like that increase just took place. And yet here we are looking at another increase in January 1 of this year that we're currently in to 73. So the way the legislation is currently written, there is actually another increase set for 2033 as well, up to 75. So they planned for just, the aging population and how that would impact those required minimum distributions. So this one gets a little funky, just if you have participants in the plan, teetering between that 72, 73 age and the changing in the guidance over the years. We could certainly provide some hard cutoff dates and tables. There are some hard cutoffs, and it does relate. It is based on the actual employee's birthday. So there is, hard cutoffs on that. And I know there's some additional guidance on just the tables that you could use to make sure that you've notified any of your employees that this might impact in shifting their ultimate required minimum distributions from one year to the next. As the last 3 years, we see several changes in the age here. So we wanted to point that out and bring that to your attention.
Yeah, I think the important part to note here is if you already triggered your RMD requirements, you have to continue to make those RMDs. It's not like you can stop.
Absolutely.
So so it's just, this is on a prospective rolling basis, the new age rules, which for younger people is great. But if you already, and I mean, even before, thank God they got rid of the 70.5 rule, because that was about as confusing as it gets in the Secure 1.0. And now they just sort of gradually raised up the age here in the Secure 2.0. But if you're already taking an RMD, you still have to take an RMD. It's only when you don't have to is sort of when you have to figure out when you need to start.
And so the final item that we just wanted to touch on here are some new rules on correcting overpayments. There's always been this fiduciary responsibility of the plan sponsor to go and try and, claw back instances where the plan may have paid out too much. A good example of that, something that we've seen in numerous instances, just auditing plans. When you're making distributions or your plan's making distribution, if there was an incorrect calculation on the vesting from the actual plan document and the employee received or the previous employee received too much, not in, more than that they were entitled to. The previous kind of sentiment was the employer would reach out to these employees, say, we accidentally overpaid you. Can you please give us this money back so we can put it back into the plan? whether you're picking up that phone call or not is a different story. And so there was always this sort of fiduciary responsibility to get this corrected. And if you couldn't get corrected, how long are you going to have to keep trying to get this money back? And so 2.0 actually restricts the plan sponsor from recovering the excess payments beyond a 3-year period if it's not the employee's fault, right? And so this really gives some relief to the employer on clarifying that they're technically not, non-compliant with their fiduciary responsibilities if it's beyond that 3-year period and they were unable to get that money back to satisfy making the plan whole again.
Yeah, this is one of those where it's sort of a win for the participants that benefited from these overpayments, but it's also does provide relief to the plan sponsor that they don't have to. They're not deemed to be violating fiduciary duty by getting back the money into the plan. So I think it's sort of a win-win on both with both parties there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's see what changes. So those were kind of the immediate impact changes. So, 2 of the more notable changes that we're highlighting must in that these are currently as they're written, non-options for employers to be done by the end of the year that we're in now, calendar year 2023. So the first is one that, there's a lot of questions out there on. As it stands, the legislation has put in place the fact that catch-up contributions, plans are required to establish a Roth option for those catch-up contributions. And so just back to the basics, just a reminder what those catch-up contributions are. If you're over a certain age, you have the ability under the IRS to contribute more to your plan than the standard limits of an employee under the age threshold. So you have the added benefit of contributing more as you get closer to retirement. So those catch-up contributions here the employer would establish the option for those to be a Roth contribution as opposed to the traditional pre-tax contributions effective for January 1, 2024. The nuance here is that individuals earning more than $145,000 in the previous year, they would have no option. As it stands, their catch-up contributions would be required to be Roth. And so, there's a lot of questions around that. And I know Andy can kind of give some additional light about what the current pulse and legislation is and answering some of these questions around this Roth option currently. Andy, any insight?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, this is a big one. This is, mandatory for everybody starting next year. There's some heartburn about the language in that a technical correction might be needed because it's being interpreted the way the legislative language was written, that in fact all catch-up contributions would be prohibited starting in 2024. So that's something that's sort of an outstanding question as a result of this provision. But take the step back in this provision. The reason this is in here is because this is one of the biggest quote unquote pay fors of the entire bill. Like the RMD, increasing the age for RMDs is a huge revenue loser for the government within the 10-year window. And so in order to offset that loser as well as other revenue losers provisions in the bill, they needed to, and really the sort of broad brush here is to incentivize Roth savings on both the catch-up side and then we'll talk about further in the presentation on the employer contribution side, in order to for people to have more Roth savings than the taxable event happens immediately, and that accelerates the revenue to the Treasury within the 10-year budget window, which means it's a net revenue positive according to how it's scored up on the Hill. So that's really why this is in here, not because everybody loves Roth so much, although Roth is a good savings option for younger workers, maybe workers in a lower tax bracket. to save through their deferrals, but it's really just to pay for, the other sort of RMD provisions and automatic enrollment provisions and the like.
Thanks, Amy. And so the second item on here, what must be done by the end of this year, is also another really hot topic, one that leaves a lot of questions on the table, and how this would ultimately be implemented in real life. But it relates to those long-term part-time employees. And so again, as the legislation currently stands, any of those long-term part-time employees with 500 hours or more in 3 consecutive years of employment at your organization, starting next year, must be eligible to participate in the plan, okay? And then this gets reduced to 2 years starting the following year, in that it would then be any of those long-term employees with 500 hours in 2 consecutive years would be eligible to participate in the plan. And so, there are a lot of questions that come with this, particularly, does this mean that they're eligible to participate in the employer matching piece? We say here employer contributions, that's not a must. The must is the employee piece. What about a safe harbor plan? Again, that's not really required. How does this impact top heavy testing? And, if they're in the plan because they had 500 2 years and then they drop, do they go in and out of the plan 1 year to the next? That's not the case. Once they're in there, they stay eligible, they continue to participate. So they could have 2 years of 500 hours and then never any 500-hour years again. But once they're in, they're still always going to be eligible to participate. So this one comes with a lot of additional clarifications, a lot of additional questions on how this would work in practicality and actuality, but certainly a big change from what we have traditionally seen in those retirement plans.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, the first time in a long time that eligibility rules under the tax code and ERISA were changed in order to increase coverage. And the policy idea behind this was you have a whole segment of the working force that just doesn't have access to the 401k plan. So, a lot of working mothers or part-time employees that, my boss used to say it was her mom used to work in, a big retail store with in the jewelry department, would only work like 20 hours a week, but was at that retail employer for decades. She was never able to be eligible to participate in the 401k plan and save. So this is sort of this idea was based in part on my old boss's mom, and it was called the Judy's Mother's provision that put in here to cover those types of workers. But this does raise a lot of administrative questions, and it's a requirement. Every plan has to change their eligibility rules if they haven't already, because the Secure 1.0 put in this concept for long-term part-time for 3 years, and they accelerated it under Secure 2.0. But this is a big one.
Great. All right, so let's take a pause for a minute and do another polling question. So we've gone over kind of the immediate changes as well as the changes that should be implemented by 2023. So if you could just answer the poll with, will any of these immediate changes impact your plan by the end of 2023? You've got the yes, no, or still not sure option. And while you're answering that, we will take a moment to give the second CPE word. So the second CPE word is payment, P-A-Y-M-E-N-T, payment. And so please do jot down that CPE word if you would like to earn CPE credit at the end of the presentation. So let's see, we have a couple, so mostly 50% of you said yes. Some of you don't think these changes will impact your plan. And then some still aren't sure. So that's okay. You can receive the slides after, and we're happy to answer any questions if you need additional guidance. So let's go to the next slide. All right, great. So we're touching on a couple more musts, just some final smaller items that we wanted to throw out there. Some musts that roll out by the end of 2025. So the first one, there is this paper statement mandate. So starting in January 1, 2026, you know, you're going to be required to send one quarterly benefit statement mailed unless the participants opt out. So that's something that will be coming down the line. Ultimately, all these changes that we are talking about, there is a deadline for formally amending your plan. That deadline has been set to the end of 2025. So working with your TPAs, your plan administrators, your attorneys who write the plan documents for you, ensuring that once you decide what options will be rolled in, all those musts and mays that you've elected must be formally amended in the plan documents and adoption agreements by 2025. And then governmental plans just have a little longer, which I'm not sure we have anyone on here that would impact, but throwing that out there. The retirement loss and savings. So this is something that we think will be coming down the line where the Department of Labor has been mandated to establish an online database for any of those unclaimed benefits of beneficiaries in the ERISA plan. So, you know, we see this similar to the databases related to the street laws and just unclaimed properties in general. And this one will be specific for those retirement benefits. So I think this is a really great addition and something that is desired. And then the final bullet point on here, which is a little bit more substantive, the fact that the legislation has put in that new plans must have an auto enrollment feature. So any new plans that come into existence beyond 2025 must have that auto enrollment feature with a minimum of a 3% deferral election up to 10%. It could have an auto escalation provision in there. This does have an exclusion for any new companies that are startups, and they consider that 3 years or younger, or any companies, existing companies with less than 10 employees. So there are very few exclusions for this. But I know that, you know, when we were talking about this yesterday, one of the wrinkles is that the fact that if you do set up a new plan currently in this year, 2023, you know, will you ultimately have to switch in 2025 when this provision becomes in effect? And the answer is yes. So, you know, there is this 2-year kind of time gap in which, you know, anything that's set up now will ultimately have to switch over to that auto enrollment. So obviously, you know, we certainly are advising our clients to just go ahead and add it in there. There's no reason not to at this point.
Yeah.
And this is something we've just been seeing, you know, come online over the past several years anyway, right? So this is the best practice. This is what more companies are moving to anyway. But this just makes that push to solidify that, and again, encourage savings. Once it's being taken out, it's easy to, you know, just forget that it's automatically contributing. So I think this is a great provision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, and really the policy justification, this is another coverage issue like the long-term part-time employee eligibility provision, is how can we get the most people covered? Because, you know, that's really how people save for their retirement, is through the workplace plan. And the data is irrefutable. I mean, with automatic enrollment participation rates go from 70% to 90% of employees. I mean, you can still opt out. Nobody's taking your freedom away to opt out if you don't want to. But the nudge, the default is the critical sort of economic, behavioral factor here at play. And so that's really what Congress is wanting to do is get many people enrolled in these plans as possible and to build up a nest egg for their retirement. And the big piece of that really is starting in 2025, you're going to have to auto enroll everybody into the plan. That's going to have an impact in terms of the amount of money saved and the amount of people that are saving for retirement. Granted, it's not, you're still on the plan sponsor side, you're not required to have a plan. That might be the next shoe to drop at some point, should the politics line up in terms of a coverage mandate on the employer. But, should you adopt a new plan, starting now, you're gonna have to switch, or, in 2025, you're gonna have to just do it immediately, but you're gonna have to add in these automated features. And I just should mention too, on the amendment deadline, IRS has been very flexible with these deadlines too. There's a statutory deadline. There was a statutory deadline for all the amendments for all the provisions in Secure 1.0 at the end of 2022, and IRS has been very flexible in pushing that back to 2025. So I wouldn't be too anxious about getting this all the paperwork squared away. However, you have to be in compliance with the law, whether your paperwork is updated or not. So you have to, in terms of the mandatory provisions, you still have to operate that, even though it's not in the plan document, if you will. All right, so this is the may part, not the must, but there's a lot of provisions in here that I think a lot of plan sponsors would be curious about, and there are innovative plan designs, and certainly talk with your consultants if you have one, or other sort of experts in this space to discuss these options. And so what may be done immediately? Well, this is a good sort of plan sponsor friendly provision in terms of self-certification for hardships. Something that the regulated community, we've been asking for a while, is to take the burden off the employer to try to collect or try to document, is this in fact a need, and to put that on the participant, put that on the employee. So if the IRS questions things, they have to provide that information to them, not the employer. So this is good. So go ahead and put that into place. Also, there's some streamlining of notices for certain participants that are unenrolled, and so that's probably a pretty small subset of people, but you don't have to keep sending them mailings if they're not enrolled into the plan. And then the big piece in this the big piece here is what I mentioned earlier, is another big pay for of this bill, besides the Roth catch-up mandate, is allowing employers to, for the first time ever, make Roth employer contributions. And so there is a lot of questions as to, and I should just say, we haven't received any guidance to date, either from the Department of Labor on the sort of their jurisdictional pieces, or the IRS Treasury on the Internal Revenue Code pieces on any of these items. And so many of these, particularly the May items, service providers aren't going to provide a product if they don't have very clear guidance from the regulatory agencies about how to structure that product. So on some of these plan design features, they'll probably just wait for clear guidance on some of the technical details, if you will. And this optional Roth treatment is one of those items. So in theory, you could do it immediately, and maybe some folks out there are doing this, but if you talk to the larger record keepers, they don't have sort of the product ready for employers to do this, I would say. And they probably won't put that into place until we get sort of guidance here, because there's questions about, does the employer have control whether they can make the option available, or can the employee sort of trigger, say, hey, I want my employer contributions to be Roth, so you have to do this. That's unclear. So that's a big question, just among many. Anything to add, Jen, there? No? Okay, yeah, so in terms of another things that this is a good, this sort of permanent rules for natural disasters, this is a nice clarification in the tax code. I mean, you talk to a lot of folks in the tax code, that are, tax geeks in the tax world, and they're like, well, what's your biggest criticism of the tax code? And it's like, well, there's no permanent rules. A lot of stuff expires. We're always trying to figure out like what is going to be extended and what's going to be removed, and vice versa. And so this is a good sort of, from a tax policy perspective, permanent rule now in place for individuals should they be unfortunately subjected to, FEMA natural disaster, hurricane, wildfire, earthquake, you name it, volcano. We can go down the list of horribles. But if they're deemed to be in an area that FEMA declares a presidentially declared natural disaster, and the plan sponsor has these rules in place for natural disasters, then that means the participant can take a distribution from the plan up to $22,000 to try to get through it in turn, and maybe do some repairs before their insurance policy kicks in or whatnot, as well as generous loan rules, which is equal to 100% of the account balance or $100,000. And so these permanent rules apply retroactively to the last time that Congress did this. The first time that Congress put these retirement plan rules for disasters in place was after Katrina in 2005. And then they've been sort of on an ad hoc basis doing it since then, but they're always sort of, at least months, maybe a year or two after the fact. And so by that point, it's the utility is negated. So this is a good sort of good tax policy provision to provide relief for people that need it. The other piece is, under the old rules, there was a clear prohibition against any monetary incentives from the employer to get people to participate in the plans. And so this would provide sort of a de minimis standard for, I call it the free toaster, to participate in the 401k rule or the Apple gift card rule. Now employers can provide some incentive to get people to participate, as in terms of like a raffle and the like. And obviously there's some guidance here about what can or cannot be done that people will want to know from the IRS that we don't have yet, but we'll wait on it. So what may be done starting next year, and I think this is really a lot of the meat of this bill does kick in 2024, just to give people about a year window to sort of absorb the policies and to sort of create new products and the like to add on to the plan. So this first item is the student loan matching program. This is a pretty innovative idea, very popular idea, that would allow for plan sponsors to provide some type of benefit for their employees to help them pay their student loans, but also save for retirement. So the idea here is participants in the plan, employees, can represent to the employer, hey, I paid X dollar amount in my student loans this year, and the employer can sort of say, okay, great, I will match that money, like on the employer contribution side, into the 401k. You don't have to make any deferrals. You're making your student loan payments, but I'm still going to give you retirement seed money because you're making those student loan payments. So that's what this is. And again, we're going to need specific sort of guidance on the details here, but there's a lot of record keepers that are really keen on offering this. And a lot of plan sponsors really want to offer, new benefits to help defray student loan payments because they are, particularly newer employees, existing employees. College is getting more and more expensive. There's just more and more student loan debt in general. And so how can employers help out with that? And so this is a piece of that, of sort of leveraging the retirement system to encourage student loan payments, but also have that employer contribution to be able to save for retirement. The other sort of two big ideas here is emergency savings was another big theme in the Secure 2.0 bill. And this was really in the context of coming out of the pandemic. There was a clear need for emergency savings due to the once in a hopefully lifetime for us pandemic emergency, and economies shut down for weeks on end. People need access to money, and so the idea is to try to figure out ways to leverage the retirement system to provide some of those safety valves for emergency savings. And so there's two main ideas here. The first one is this sort of universal hardship distribution, which minimal paperwork, minimal self-certification again, but plan sponsors could, starting next year, put this feature into place to allow participants to take up to $1,000 for emergency expenses for the car repair, the dishwasher repair, the other appliances. Things happen during the year. You might need some cash. This was just sort of like, hey, take it. And then there are guardrails here to not do wholesale leakage, but the idea here is if employees were aware of, hey, I could take up to $1,000 a year, basically excuse free, if you will. Hey, I might actually start contributing to the plan now. If I was sort of hesitant before, well, now I can have some access to my money. So yeah, I'll go ahead and start making deferrals. So in a way, this is sort of counterintuitive, but it might actually encourage retirement plan participation, knowing that should an emergency arise, you can get some access to cash. Again, there's guardrails here. You have to you can only take once a year up to $1,000. You can't take it again unless you recontributed that amount back into the plan. That clock resets after a 3-year period, but there is restrictions on here, but again, safety valve. The other idea is sort of a broader idea, more complex idea, I think, on the plan sponsor side, but this would allow for the plan sponsor to create separate accounts for emergency savings. They're after-tax accounts. The employer must match. It's auto-enrolled into these accounts, and the match must be made, but the matching contribution goes into the 401k plan. And the maximum amount in these accounts is $2,500, only eligible for non-highly compensated workers. So again, more bells and whistles here than the emergency, than the universal withdrawal option. But some plan sponsors, you don't have to do any of these. You could do both. You could do one or the other. So all of this kicks in next year, and we're certainly anxious for guidance on the details here, so companies could sort of offer these products to employers. What may be done next year? Cash outs sort of increased to $7,000. This is just sort of a plan sponsor item where if you have a terminated employee that makes that has between $1,000 and $5,000 in the account, you can automatically roll that over into an IRA for that employee. That just increases that level to $7,000. A new domestic abuse hardship withdrawal for $10,000, up to $10,000. So that's a good provision for individuals in sort of a fraught situation, and they need some cash to get out of that. Also, the third item here is just discretionary amendments. So if you're an employer or small business and you're doing your taxes and you have a really good year and you want to put more money towards your employees in the retirement plan, you could do so retroactively for the prior year through a discretionary amendment. Secure 1.0 had a provision allowing for retroactive plan adoption for the prior year too, which is, you know, another good small business provision that don't have and would encourage plan adoption. So this just sort of furthers that concept for existing plans that want to retroactively increase benefits. And then the final piece here is just the auto portability. This is what I like to call, what I envision is fixing the plumbing of the system and getting record keepers to talk to each other and having, you know, I think a theme here is automating enrollment. Automating the whole system makes it better. Automating, and you know, I think over time the industry has done good jobs of creating automated features for enrollment, but we've done a less good job of automating the savings to follow the worker throughout his or her working career as they change jobs and the like. And so, you know, that's a huge source of leakage. That's the biggest source of leakage, is cashing out during job change. And so this is a way to fix that problem, get the record keepers to communicate to one another and have the retirement money follow the worker from 401k plan A to 401k plan B to 401k plan C seamlessly. And so that, you know, has the potential to really increase retirement savings throughout the course of a working career. So what may be done starting in 25 is, you know, catch-up contributions have to be Roth now, but for certain age groups, Congress threw a little bit of a fig leaf and said, well, you know, if you're between the ages of 60 and 63, now your catch-up contribution limits will be doubled. So that's a good sort of provision for folks that, you know, can so they can juice up their retirement savings before retirement.
Great, thanks, Andy. So we're going to bring the audience to our third and final polling question before we go into the final content of today's presentation. So please take a moment to answer the question if you've learned a few key takeaways that you'll be bringing back to your own organization or your clients' organizations, whatever that may be. Yes, no, unsure. And while we take some time to answer that, I'm going to go ahead and give you the third CPE word, which is pension. PENSION, pension is the third CPE word. So make sure to jot that down. Great. Let's see what the results. Oh, look. Great. 88% of you have learned something that you'll be bringing back. So that's wonderful. And we're going to flip over back to Andy on the last couple of pieces of info we have for you.
Yeah, so this doesn't kick in 2027, but this sort of revolutionizes the savers credit, and savers credit right now is sort of underused. Nobody knows what it, you know, I mean, it only applies to a very select few of individuals. You have to have taxable income. But turning this into a savers match makes sort of the credit refundable, if you will. So it broadens the availability of the credit to like tens of millions of more people. And now it's a government match. So you can save up to $2,000 and you're going to get a government matching contribution of $1,000 if you're in this, you know, if you make between $40,000 and $71,000 joint filers. And so this is, you know, this was a big revenue loss too, because now we're having the government basically subsidize everybody's retirement savings, particularly on the lower end. So in terms of, you know, some of the criticisms you hear of the system is that, well, 401ks, they're only for rich people, that they're actually not for the working person. You know, all the tax benefits are skewed to the wealthy because it's deduction, not a credit. So this is a way of targeting retirement incentives more towards the moderate income earners to basically make the system more equitable, if you will, in terms of and benefit you know, working people and have them really have a nest egg too. So all good things, but unfortunately it doesn't kick in for an eternity. So But there's a ton of details on this that need to be ironed out too. So it's good to have a long runway to make sure this works well. So anyway, if you were to go to the American Retirement Association's website, araadvocacy.org, and sort of click on, and there's a PDF sort of document too for you to click on as you get these slides. But we have a handy dandy chart that lists all the provisions and their effective dates and sort of in chronological order, so you can sort of order your operations, if you will, and make sure you're good to go with Secure 2.0.
Yeah, and so everyone who gets these slides, or these will be on our website, like Andy mentioned, you can actually just access that chart within this document, just double click on the PDF. It's really well laid out, really easy to navigate what those changes are. So we do encourage you to download those and keep them on file somewhere for future reference. I think almost everyone will probably need them. So.
And if you're, into retirement policy and you're an HR professional and you want to become that expert within your organization, differentiate yourself, within your organization as the retirement plan geek, we have plan sponsor certification educational credential for you. So just click on that website and find out more.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer and Andy. Some great information there. We really appreciate it. Looks like we have a few minutes left. So there are a few questions that came in that I'll go ahead and present to you all. The first one is, for the auto enrollment feature, will this apply to new employees or all employees when it goes into effect? And what about part-time employees?
Yeah, well, obviously this is going to be subject to specific guidance, but I think the assumption is the automatic enrollment would apply to all eligible participants. I think that's a fair way to think about it, including part-time workers. So you don't for the part-time worker piece, as Jen mentioned, you can disaggregate them for testing purposes. And you could for top heavy testing as well, which is sort of a key piece of the guidance that we're going to need. But you have to make them eligible to defer, but that you don't have to, unless you want to, you don't have to, give them a match or a non-elective contribution on the employer side. Jen, do you have anything to add there?
No, but Andrew, we did have a question come in just a second ago that I want to address. As we're talking about, I guess I'm switching to the part-time employees being enrolled. Someone asked, would this apply to seasonal employees? And just so, my interpretation of the guidance, while seasonal, they're still part-time. And so as long as any employee has over that 500 hour threshold, it would include seasonal or periodic, whatever you call them. But it's defined by the hours. And so I would use that as the basis. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, you have to track hours for everybody. Yeah. And I mean, that's the way ERISA doesn't really, the classifications of employees is sort of irrelevant. It's really like how many hours that you are in service to the employer is the bedrock standard under ERISA.
Yep.
All right. Another question is related to the forced cashed out limit of $7,000. Is that mandatory?
Yeah, in terms of cash outs, it's not. I mean, plan sponsors can keep all the amounts of money into the plan if they want to. I think a lot of plan sponsors, there's costs to that. You have to record keep that. You have to administer that. Make sure that's invested properly. And so, I think there's a desire amongst most plan sponsors to, particularly amongst terminated employees, if they're sort of orphans, if they're gone, they can't contact them to be able to sort of get that money out of the plan and get that into an IRA, which I will say for the retirement lost and found piece, there are going to be new reporting requirements on the plan sponsor to ensure that the information is correct for the lost and found. So that's going to be a burden on the plan sponsor, whenever that becomes effective. I think it's in a couple of years. So that's just something to keep in mind too. But maybe more people will become familiar with the Department of Labor when there's all these orphaned 401k accounts housed in this database, or at least that information is housed in that database. But yeah, I mean, DOL, in order to make that workable, is going to need information from a lot of plan sponsors in order to be able to track them. Should an orphaned participant, which is like a term of art, just come calling to DOL and say, "Where's my money?" So
yeah, and that force out where we see that a lot, in the plans, particularly, if you want to hang out with GRF as your auditor some more, having those participants in there count towards your participant count. And so, if you're trying to avoid that audit, that's a good provision to put in place, because it will reduce that participant count for purposes of that 100 threshold in the audit. We see that come up quite a bit.
That's a great point. I think we probably have time for one more question. This one's related to the student loan repayment matching piece. Would this match be in addition to the match that's already being made?
No. So whatever the current matching situation is, it would just apply to more people that aren't deferring, but can show that they're paying student loans.
Okay.
One more, Andrew.
All right. For the Roth catch-up contributions, what if your current plan does not offer a Roth option?
Well, you don't have to, but then you can't do catch-ups. So that's an option. But if you're gonna, another question is, I think if you don't want to have to deal with the 145 threshold, because people under can make pre-tax, people over have to do Roth. If you want to just require everybody to do Roth, nothing's prohibiting that from happening either. So that's an option too, to sort of make it easier on the plan sponsor to implement.
Yeah, but if you don't have a Roth option, then anyone making over 145 would not be able to contribute catch-up contributions. So you have to have the option in order for them to continue catch-up. So if they're currently, making those catch-up contributions now, pre-tax, that benefit would go away to them. And so that's, a big consideration for employers and communication with their employees and what you all would want to consider. But I think that's,
And the worst case scenario is if this technical issue isn't addressed, whether it's through Treasury or from the Hill by the end of the year, nobody will be able to make catch-up conversation, next year. So that would truly be a kerfluffle, if you will.
Well, ending on kerfluffle, no, we thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to Andy for his expertise in all of this. We're really thankful to have the insights of what's actually going on and having the pulse and what's going on out there. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone.
Thanks for having me.
All right.